I mean, fundamentally, businesses all seem to monitor three core metrics, which is just sales, revenues, and costs. And it strikes me that everyone's found a way to make all the other channels correlate down through some way to those points. Why not social media? Why does it remain so elusive? I mean, we've had the privilege to work with lots of different brands, and some brands that don't employ very direct strategies. So, for example, multi-brand and FMCG organisations, and they tend to correlate their success with time spent with brand. And they know that the more time you spend with a brand, the greater the likelihood of everyone's going to, maybe not everyone, but most people are going to gamble online at some point. And at which point it's just a case of doing it with the people that you are most familiar with, trust the most, or like the most. And ultimately, all of that is an investment in getting people to spend time with the brand, which will ultimately come back to a click. Now, the point is that you can't track it in 30 days on a last click attributed basis because they've gone all the way around the houses. But companies have managed to get their PR to sort of line up with ROI metrics. Why does social media remain so elusive?
Alas, I don't have the answer to that one.
That could be the reason it would remain. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Is it a tracking issue? Is it because
it is.
I think part of social media, 'cause obviously it's kind of, I engage with your brand on Twitter, like the Betfair poker Twitter account is hilarious. So I love that, and I tell my friends about it. But how do you? Yeah, she shows you the interaction I have with my friends. But we're like that. I suppose, how do you, as a brand, how do you actually measure? Okay, well, Finton told a friend about this Twitter account. They started following it. They became a customer. How do you measure that success? And I think one of the issues probably a lot of operators face is it has to be done at such a large scale. You have to have such a big community to be able to see any effect that you actually just miss and don't see the day-to-day kind of activity and the positive or negative brand association that happens with your social media. And I'm sure you guys hopefully have a strategy around that. Like, how do you measure success? How do you measure those referrals that happen outside of pure kind of click-based cookie tracking?
Yeah, I think that's the model that everyone's used to, is that whether it was a click or even an impression could be tracked. So even if they didn't click, you know that they saw it, and therefore that could be somehow backward factored into the ROI calculation. But with a lot of sharing doesn't drop a cookie in a lot of instances, and it doesn't, and even some of the clicks don't always can drop cookies if they're just organically shared. So it does create a lot of options. But I know, Anna, you've worked on lots of different models to try and prove ROI.
So my background, if any of you aren't familiar with it, is I actually did my master's on social data analysis and how it affects stock price. So from a stock perspective, you should be doing social, because I can tell you that brands that have poorly managed social presences during times of crisis typically do have a drop in stock price as a result. So from that pure perspective, in a non-revenue related perspective, but in a value of share value, social media is important from that regard. So that's one thing I definitely calculate into as a revenue retention type of metric. One of the other things, looking at more just pure traditional type of measurements, most companies look at some type of NPS or brand health score, and there usually is a dollar amount associated with that NPS score. So the first part is creating a metric value of what is your current brand health, and then incorporating it into that NPS scorecard. That is to get kind of the warm fuzzies, the things that you can't 100% measure. You also should try to develop some sign-up process that asks people how often or how they first heard about the service. Then you can backtrack. If we say 10% of our users on this survey found out about this through a social media venue, then it's likely that we can attribute 10% of our traffic from some type of social source. That does require you to actually explain to them what a social source is. Because often people say, did you find out about us from a social source? And they don't think reviews are social sources, forums are social sources, blog posts are social sources. They don't think about that. Your consumer just thinks it's the internet.
Are consumers actually aware of how they got converted? Did you feel that they're actually...
These are the only ways that we have right now. I can't go to you and say, what did your subconscious think when you went to the website? What was your subconscious focusing on? We're never going to get there. But we never got there with TV. We never got there with radio. We never got there with magazine ads. So let's stop chasing the unicorn that's never going to come in and figure out metrics that at least we can kind of figure out. So Sorry, I'm not attacking you, but I feel like everyone gets so hung up on this, and it's like
really
it's a
good point.
unicorn.
But I suppose the question then would be, when you're, like, for example, for
Attribution.
Greenlight as an agency, when you're dealing with the online marketing team, who are, how many clicks, what was my CPA? Like, when you're talking about TV, magazine, Net Promoter Score, this is stuff the brand guys get
You have to
measured
try-
on. So how do you...
So the second part.
But how do you cross that divide between using essentially brand metrics for an online acquisition team?
It's both. So you have this side, which is the brand side, where you're getting the warm fuzzies, the things that you can't track. And then you are incorporating tracking into your day usage. Now, if you are smart, you can do some backlink analysis and do some organization as where the traffic is coming into your site. Now, that does take a lot of effort from you, and I'm not going to pretend that it's the easiest thing in the world to set up, but you can track what has come from actual social sources by doing, queries for common forum names that are popular within your area, common blogs that are popular within your area, and then obviously doing all the routes of Twitter and Facebook that there are, which there are a lot if you've ever looked at your back-end analytics. And that can actually give you a picture of what social is actually driving to your site, and you can do some click-throughs and conversion funnel analysis off of that. So you can say people who come from social sites tend to convert at this level, and then when you match it with your brand data, knowing that either 10% converted because they heard about it from that regard, or we can say that our NPS score went across that, building and I'm trying to explain this at a simple level, which is actually a large amount of calculations. If you combine the two together, you can actually get a pretty good guesstimate of how effective it's been. Now, it's not easy, and I think that's the reason people don't do it.
It's very easy to take two columns and basically how much you spent and how much you made over the last 30 days or something like that. But it's that acquisition oriented mentality that I think you perfectly alluded to, which is someone's going to come by your desk and go, so how many pounds did you get back on the X amount of pounds you came into my office and asked me for? That's what sounds like is driving the conversation.
I think so.
But I think it's when you pull back any of those. There's some type of stat that says if Coca-Cola stopped advertising, would we be drinking Coke in 2 years? And I think that part of advertising, the part that has that brand feeling to it, is just as important as your traditional, ROI-driven advertising. But the beauty of social is that it can technically be both if you have a really strong web analytics program and an understanding of how you're doing things. But I don't want to promise a magic unicorn that we can ever get to the root of someone's subconscious decision to use a service.
Well, you can always do surveys to measure prompted and unprompted brand awareness. There are processes and systems set up in place for actually measuring that. I think, in my mind, the waters get a bit murky with social media mixing in with traditional online media. It's hard to distinguish the effect of advertising on TV versus advertising on Facebook if you're doing them both concurrently. At the end of the day, everything just falls into a big non-attributable pot. If anybody comes up with a way to measure it, then
you can measure a lot more than you think. I think there's a lot you can measure. It's just the halo effect is difficult, but there is a direct effect you can measure. And if you can do some type of testing where you're not running TV ads at the same time, you might be able to get an understanding of what that halo effect actually is. But that means having very, very accurate forecasting models and understandings of all other channels before coming in. There are ways you can do it, but it's not simple. That's the point that I'm getting to. The reason people don't do it is because when you go to a marketing manager who's usually been tasked with social media, they don't have any analytics experience, and they're not going to be the person who can prove to you that it's worth the budget. And I think that's probably the most frustrating thing, is when I've sat with companies and worked with them and gone through all the details of the back end, we can see things like people who come from blogs tend to convert at a higher rate for retail brands. So you should be on a blog solely because they're going to spend more money as well, and they're going to convert easier. So you learn things about social that has an effect that may not exactly be the raw conversion, but affects the progression of the path. But it takes attribution modeling and really strong web analytics and time to do any of this.
And I think talking from an operator point of view and a large operator point of view, and I don't imagine this is just the gambling industry, but it's almost a chicken egg situation. You want to put a social program in place, but you haven't got the back end infrastructure and web analytics programs to support it. And by the time you've put in the back end infrastructure and web analytics program to support it, social media's moved on so much that you're suddenly well behind. And it's an issue that we see with a lot of people that we talk to. That when you have got these big clunky websites, putting on an infrastructure program across all of your assets, it's not easy.
So have you had this experience of having to ask for budget, or being asked for budget even?
Completely. I mean, I've waited 12 months to put a pixel on a page before, and I think
that's good.
Yeah, I was quite happy with that actually. But then it took us, 2-3 years ago, we took the decision to put this infrastructure in place, which has made things a little bit easier for us as social has developed and has kind of moved over, and not only socially, over channels itself. So we've got quite a structured back-end attribution process now that gives us, does allow us to put some kind of weight and ROI behind a lot of our social media. But it took a huge investment 2-3 years ago with web analytics packages, Omniture, whatever else to come in and support that activity. I think getting that right at the start for any new company that's starting up around now is huge.